these are the two deposits, if you look from an airplane, what it is. Now, what I want you to imagine is I cut a line straight down in the ground, something like this. I just, boom, cut a big line in the ground so I can look at the profile of the deposition of that deposit. And this is what it looks like when you look at it from the side. This is the north little pile of it. This is the south little pile of it. This is the surface of the earth, or of the ground, the soil. That's about 500 feet above sea level. It drops down to about 1,000 feet under sea level, or as I told you earlier, Coles Hill depth is around 1,500 feet underground. There are there's two concentrations. One is at 0.025 by weight percent. In other words, that much, that 0.025% by weight for every pound, 0.025 of that poundage would be 0.00025 would be the uranium concentration. That's the yellow. And it's primarily this very low concentration that's there, and then they got some higher concentration, which is about 4 times that, or 0.1% by weight. Now, I want you to also understand something here. That's low-grade oil, or ore. There are places around the earth where it's 10%, 25% grade. That's high grade. That's huge high level. The advantage here, the economics says they can go for this stuff and make a big profit. But the advantage here is because it is low concentration, the things like thorium and other things that you really object to when you have the presence of uranium is really not present within this ore because it's a low concentration. I'm not saying it doesn't have thorium in it, but it is not as much there simply because it is a low-grade concentration. If it were a high-grade, 10%, 15%, you would have major elemental presence that could cause problems. I told you I wanted to, again, let me come back here. This is north-south from looking at the side. This is north-south looking from above. So let me come down to here. This is north-south from looking above at the geological map. And what I want to point out to you is that this little red dot is where the uranium is. In fact, that red dot's a heck of a lot larger than the actual deposit itself, but I had to make it red dot big enough for you guys in the back to see, okay? There is all around it, and it is in what is called gneiss. Looks like gneiss, but it's German. The G is silent. German is EI. It's going to put the emphasis on the I. So you pronounce this phonetically N-I-C-E. It is granite. That's all gneiss is. Everything around this location and where it is granite. The ore is in granite. It's not in dirt. It's in solid rock. To one side of it, this is going south, and it's important to understand this too. To one side it's got shale stone, but below that is igneous rock. And that too is a solid form of rock. And the reason I'm pointing this out is there's a river down here called the Bannister River. There's a river up here called the Roanoke River. They converge over at this point, and that eventually leads to where Virginia Beach gets its water from. So that's the concern, that you have a river below it, a river above it in terms of the north and the south. But the reason this uranium has never caused any problem is it's in rock, solid rock. If I look at it, and let me come back again to the profile. If I'm being laborious to you, I apologize. Here's the surface, here's goes down into the depth. Here is looking at the geological, a little small geological map, looking again at the side. Here's the surface going down in depth. Again, here's the dot of what represents the location of the Colesville deposit. All of this is granite. All of this stuff is granite. So it is embedded in granite. I'm not trying to argue anything except to let you know it's not like you're digging it out of a piece of dirt. This is a close-up look. Let me come back. I've taken this and basically blowing up this small area so that you look at it and you see the Colesville location, which is near the surface. And again, it's a lot of granite here. And every one of these little vertical lines is where a company has drilled down thousands of feet into the ground, core bored, and got a core and brought it up. And that core looks like this. It's rock. Those red locations is where some uranium is. This is the perspective of what you're looking at, is all I'm trying to get to you. This is what the engineers look at. This is what the scientists look at and begin to make their decisions about what the challenge is. If they're going to mine the stuff in the unconventional method, like I said, a conventional mine, they're basically going to run a big shaft. And this shaft, in this case, if this were thought to be the ore, this shaft would go more than, probably go down to about 1,800 feet down into the ground. And this shaft is big enough that it's a big elevator shaft. It's so big that it can take people and equipment and ore up and down it. And basically what they do is they run the shaft down into the ground, then they run a horizontal shaft. This horizontal shaft they call a road, and that road simply runs over to where the ore is. And again, they just run the road into it, the shaft into it, and begin to do their blasting. And it falls down as rubble, and of course the ceiling goes up, and it blasts some more, and it falls down as rubble, and they keep taking it out. So eventually the ceiling gets so darn high that they have to have another road going in. And then that becomes the floor area because they backfill the ceiling with other material, which we'll talk about. And then they keep on blasting until they work their way up near the surface. That's the way. They're just simply blasting it and taking it out by way of this conventional mining technique. When they get it up to the surface, and believe me, there are some mines big enough they actually use trucks. Big trucks like we see out on the road. The mines are that huge. I don't think this mine's going to be that huge. They'll have smaller vehicles that bring it up through the shaft. But they bring it out, they put it into a processor. Now they're going to bring up huge, big hunks of stone, and they're going to have to make that stone into smaller particles. Think of the little part. If you've got a gravel driveway, think of the particles in your driveway. They're going to have to reduce it to those particle sizes, or maybe somewhat smaller. And then they will run a leaching compound through it, water with acidic or base solution, and they will leach out the uranium. And they will take that uranium and then process it into a higher concentration. Basically, they're going to take it from this 0.025% to 1%, which is what they have in the mine, and bring it up to a concentration of 75 to 85% U3O8. That is what's called yellowcake. It's literally yellow. And what happens is, as they're taking out and getting the uranium out, they have the leftover material, which is called the tailings. How many of you heard in the discussion about the mining of the problem with tailings? Anybody heard that term?
The big problem is coal.
Big problem with coal. Any kind of residual after you take out, after you've extracted what you want. From this process on, I'm going to talk about the tailings, because that is the major issue that people are discussing. And that's the major issues that have faced the people down in the General Assembly. Tailings. It's no more than the content of the ore that was brought up from under the ground after the uranium has been removed. There's nothing in the tailings that wasn't in the ore to begin with. It's the residual, the leftover. Okay? Now, it's not to say it doesn't have products in it, because the ore had the products in it. But it is simply the leftover after you take the ore out. In this case, for where they're getting it out of the rock, and that's the reason I've been telling you it's granite, it's just going to be pieces of small rock, is what it'll be. Yes, it has some residual uranium in it that they were not able to extract. Yes, it will have a little bit of thorium in it. Yes, it will have a little bit of radium in it. But because of those low concentrations of ore to begin with, it's very low. I'm not trying to encourage you to believe this in terms of agree with the goodness of this whole thing. I'm just trying to give you the perspective, because there are parts of the world where it is huge concentrations of thorium and radium. But the mineral content is the uranium that could not be extracted, and some other minerals, radium being one of them. And here again, the reason is the radium is left in there. They don't need it. So the radium's left in there, and of course, as you can think, the radium generates the radon gas, which is what we all worry about when we build a house or whatever. Now they're going to try to handle the tailings, might get it in the right place, in two manners. They will take those tailings, depending on how they leach it out, they'll take those leaching residuals out of it and get rid of them so that they've got a neutral tailings left behind. And they're going to use two methods to store it. If I take a big rock and I blow it up into tiny little pebbles, what I end up with is with a bigger pile in my hand. It's the same mass as it was as the big rock, but it has air between the little tiny particles, so it occupies a larger volume. So they can't stick every bit of it back in the ground, but they want to stick every bit of it back in those voids where they took it out. So that's, again, still the tailings in that case will be surrounded by that rest of that gneiss or granite that's down there. What they can't store back underground, they would use what's called below-grade containment. And in a few minutes, just a few seconds here, I'm going to tell you that is where, again, we're focusing in on where the issues are. Two methods. What's called remix and return. The other method is called below grade. The remix is called remix and return because they will take those tailings and they will mix them with a formulation. They'll make up a formulation that's made up of fly ash, which comes from coal, and some Portland cement. And they will make will look somewhat just like if you've got a patio in your backyard, in your back door, and you got a piece of concrete and got rocks in it, that's basically what they're making. And they will take that and put it back underground, compact it, and fill up that mine void where they created when they extracted the ore, so that that compacted tailings that is solidified will structurally replace the ore, the rock that was taken out, so you don't have collapses of the ground. The other technique is the underground, the below surface, below grade containment. One of the concerns has been, what if you have a huge rain? And what if that rain washes into the, floods into the tailings location and washes it all out towards the river, be the Bannister River or the Roanoke River, and gets into, eventually works its way down into the Kerrs Dam area, and which is near where the Virginia Beach extracts its water for its source. It's municipal water. I found out about this when I was looking at it. The government is going to require these people to store it at an elevated site. And I said, remember when I said they have the sites of the ore, but they have a lot of land around it, and that's a good thing? The reason it's a good thing is they got to find a place on that property that is high enough that if you had a rainfall rate of 38 inches per hour, for one day, 24-hour period, there would be no flooding at that location. In other words, you got to put it up on the top of a tall hill. To give you some concept of what 38 inches in 24-hour period means, the worst flooding that came from Hurricane Sandy, wherever this was, I don't know where this occurred, but the worst flooding that was documented for Hurricane Sandy was 11 inches within a 24-hour period. So basically the government is saying, hey guys, we're going to require you to be able to withstand a rainfall 3.5 times what it was from Sandy. In other words, they have looked at the worst rain conditions they've had, not just only at that place in Virginia, but up and down the East Coast.